This is the first lesson from the partner Aix-Marseille University. Our group is made of 8 people, 6 of whom contributed to this lesson: Thomas Changeux, Andrea Doglioli, Sandrine Ruiton, Delphine Thibault, Thierry Thibault, and myself, Jean-Christophe Poggial. All of us are making their research in the Mediterranean Institute of Oceanography. This lesson introduces the very basic knowledge on physical and biological aspects that are needed in the context of spatial planning, with main focus on a particular example of Mediterranean coastal ecosystem around Marseille.
Good morning, I'm Andrea Doglioli. I am physical oceanographer and associate professor at the University of Marseille. And in the framework of Module 1, I show you a few slides about the Mediterranean circulation, the hydrodynamics of the Bay of Marseille, and Lagrangian method to study this physical oceanography. The surface circulation in the Western Mediterranean Sea is characterized by a general anti-clockwise gyre that, with the presence of two main features: the northern current in red in the northern part of the basin, and in the southern part of the basin the Algerian current. In the middle of these two main currents, there is a lot of turbulence characterized by the presence of ocean eddies, filaments, and fronts. If we zoom on the Gulf of Lion, we can see that the northern current can have a big impact on the circulation in the Gulf, and another important role is played by the wind and the presence of the Rhône river waters. If we zoom more and we study the circulation in the Bay of Marseille, we observe very complex patterns strongly dependent from the wind direction and its intensity. To know this circulation is very important for questioning such as to study the destiny of the wastewater from the city of Marseille, as in this study from my colleague Millet in 2018. How we can know this current and the impact? Satellites and numerical model can help a lot. In particular, satellite measure the shape of the ocean and providing the intensity and the direction of the surface current, and the numerical model solve the Newton's second law, providing a forecast of the current, such as for the weather forecast. Very recently, the European Union funded a big program, Copernicus, to put freely available data from satellite and numerical models in the website marinecopernicus.copernicus.eu. Naturally, satellite measurements and numerical model has to be validated by in situ measurements, and a particular kind of this measurement is the Lagrangian measurements. The concept of Lagrangian measurement is to study the current following drifter object. The name Lagrangian comes from Joseph Louis Lagrange, that was an French-Italian researcher that developed this method together with Benjamin Franklin, that using this kind of measurements, provide the first map of the Gulf Stream in the 18th century. At that time, the instruments was a simple bottle with the messages inside with the date of release, And when people found this bottle with the message on the different beach, send the message to the institution, research institution, and a researcher can know the destiny of these bottles. Very recently, last year, a bottle released in 18th century was founded on the Australian coast and was part of a German program to study the current in the Pacific Ocean. Very famous Lagrangian experiment was provided by Curtis Ebbesmeyer, an American oceanographer that studied surface current using floating waste, and in particular it was famous thanks to the plastic ducks that fall by a cargo in 92. And the destiny of this plastic duck allow to draw this route for the surface current that is resumed in this figure. A modern Lagrangian drifter is a little bit complex, naturally, and at the surface there is a buoy with a sensor for temperature and to the system to transmit the data to a satellite. And at 50-meter depth, there is a drifting anchor that obliges the drifter to follow the current at 50-meter depth. That is an international standard. This kind of instrument is named SVP buoy from a Surface Velocity Program, an international standard. And we our lab participated to this program, and last year we released one of these buoys named Louise in the Algerian current that I showed you before, and here you have the trajectory of this drifter that followed this current. And the Lagrangian trajectory can be also numerical modeled, solving a very simple equation. Here you have some example of numerical experiment in the northern current, and this can be very useful to study the dispersion of larvae, jellyfish, or other plankton organisms, or also to study the dispersion of pollutants such as radioactivity, plastics, and wastewaters. So this is typical applied research using these kind of methods.
Hello, I'm Thomas Changeux, hydrobiologist specialized in fish and fisheries. In this part, I will speak about the terrestrial marine continuum and try to explain why and how marine areas can be influenced by adjacent terrestrial environment. 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. More than 87% of this water is salted and stands mainly in the oceans. Only 3% of the water is freshwater, but there is an important turnover which is made by the water cycle. First, ocean water evaporates while it warms under the sun irradiance. Then, in the second place, vapor condensates into clouds that can be transported by the wind. Then clouds turn into rain when temperature falls, and water returns down to the sea by rivers and into the ground. This cycle is one of the principal driving forces of the climate and is influenced by global warming. Water follows watersheds, which is the hydrological spatial unit to be considered when you want to study a coastal zone. The watershed is a surface limited by a line, here in yellow dots, from which all the water falls to the same catchment and finally goes at sea. Inside the same watershed, you can make the distinction of subwatershed like on the upper left of the figure. Because watershed has a fractal branched structure which is the same at different scales. Marseille is close to the Rhône River watershed, you can see here on the left part of the slide. Since the river Nile has been heavily dammed and extensively exploited for irrigation purposes, the Rhône River represents now the most important input of water in the Mediterranean Sea. River Rhône drainage area encompasses other climatic regions like the Alps or the continental region of Burgundy, having a higher waterfall than the Mediterranean climate, which is characterized by a negative hydrological balance, meaning that evaporation is higher than waterfall. The floods of the Rhône River are especially violent and influence all the Gulf of Lion basin. Since the Mediterranean has no important tide, the sediments accumulation at the mouth of the Rhône River forms a delta zone, which can be found at small scales at the mouth of many other Mediterranean tributaries. In the right side of the slide, you can see that the city of Marseille is directly under the largest arm of the Rhône Delta River. In yellow are represented the small intermittent affluents that may transform into heavily charged torrents during thunderstorms. The main watershed, in pink, is the river Yvonne, which has been strongly modified to secure the city from the floods. Most of the time, the river Yvonne is totally diverted to the south in the direction of Cortu wastewater treatment plant, as indicated by the small red arrow. Following the Water Framework Directive, the ecological status of rivers and coastal waters has been determined for every codified water body. On this map of the region, there is no coastal water in blue, meaning that there is no coastal water body in very good ecological status. Most of them are in green, standing for good ecological status. Four main exceptions are Cortu zone, the industrial harbor of Marseille, the Côte Bleue, and the Gulf of Fos, which are in mean or mediocre status. In this part, I want to remind you some basic principles of life organization that will be used later on.
Most of the organisms in the ocean are plankton. Plankton drift with the current. They can be different from nekton, which are pelagic organisms which are not constrained by currents, or benthic organisms that live with the seabed. Plankton can be also split in two types, holoplankton and meroplankton. Holoplankton will actually live their whole life as plankton, swimming in the ocean, like most diatoms, dinoflagellates, foraminifers, and zooplankton such as amphipods, krill, copepods, and pelagic tunicates. Meroplankton or metagenic organisms spend only part of their life, either their adult forms or their juvenile forms. We can find like fish, some small fish, we can find jellyfish, or we can find crabs or decapods. The pelagic environment can be split in different layers. The euphotic layers, which is on the top of the ocean, is the layer where the light penetrates. So the depth of the euphotic layer will be a function of the amount of particles. That layer can be only a few centimeters, a few meters deep in highly eutrophic areas, such as the Rhône River plume, Italian shore, in red in that figure below, or can be as deep as 250 meters in ultra-oligotrophic area, such as the southeastern sector of the Med Sea. The pelagic environment can be split in different layers according to depth: epipelagic from 0 to 200 meters, mesopelagic down to 1000 meters, bathypelagic to 4000 meters, abyssopelagic to 600,000 meters and below the algal layer. Epipelagic layer is where most of the plankton will be found. The Neretic zone is actually located over the continental shelf and inhabits typical zooplankton. The Houston layer is actually the layer in contact between the atmosphere and the ocean and is only a few centimeters deep, about 30 centimeters. Community of plankton in that layer, as well as plastic, are very typical. Plankton in the ocean will follow different temporal variation. First, seasonal variation. Phytoplankton abundance will actually be under the control of the availability of nutrients, light, as well as temperature, and the stratification of the water column. In spring, when the water column starts to stratify, the light is higher, the temperature increases, and nutrients are still available, we can see the increase in phytoplankton biomass, as we call it, the spring bloom. Phytoplankton will be then used by zooplankton, will be reaching maximum biomass by a few months later, depending on the temperature. During summertime, the lack of nutrients available will not allow phytoplankton to grow. We can usually find a fall mini bloom when the wind are picking up in fall, allowing the mixing of the water column and the availability of nutrients to phytoplankton. Following that fall mini bloom of phytoplankton, a small zooplankton bloom can occur with the same lag in a few months. Daily, we can see also migration of zooplankton. Usually they rise to the surface of the ocean just before sunset and go down deep just before sunrise. This cycle is actually led by the light, the sun and the moon, but the prey availability and an avoidance of predator. Zooplankton will go up at night when visual predators can't actually see them, and they will prey on the phytoplankton that have been growing during the day. Those cycles are found everywhere on Earth, but obviously some zooplankton do the reverse cycle.
All the living organisms, whatever animal or plants, and even the unicellular, like bacteria, follows a common cycle of life that can be simplified into two main functions: growth, with alimentation, and reproduction or multiplication, whether they exchange their genetic material or not. I will give you two examples in relation with the terrestrial marine continuum of the Mediterranean Sea, two species of fish that alternatively live in rivers and at sea. These species are called Amphihaline fishes, from the Greek amphi, meaning both sides, and halin, meaning salt. First, the shad, Allosaphalax in Latin, like sea lamprey, Petromyzon marinus in Latin, and sturgeon, Accipenser sturio in Latin, reproduces in river and grows at sea. These fish look like a giant sardine of 30 centimeters long. In spring, when temperature rises over 11 degrees, they group and make upstream migrations to their spawning grounds. The juveniles make their downstream migration with floods in the following fall. They accomplish this cycle in 2 to 5 years. Another famous euryhaline species is eel, Anguilla anguilla in Latin. It reproduces in the Sargasso Sea, close to the northern America, and growth in river and lagunas of all Europe. The species make a transoceanic migration of more than 6,000 kilometers long and needs up to 12 years to accomplish its cycle. All these species are endangered, first because their migration depends on connection between sea and river habitats, which is interrupted by the construction of dams. And secondly, because they have been overfished by interception fisheries. To finish my presentation, I will end with another basic principle, which is to consider that in an ecosystem, the species are interacting each other. The predator-prey relationship is the most commonly considered. Figuring these relationships by arrows from prey at the bottom of the slide to predators in the elevated part of the network conceptualized what is called a food web. Considering the chain of predation, each species or group of species is situated at different trophic levels, where predators stand for the highest level and phytoplankton, only depending on photosynthesis, for the lowest. Here, the Gulf of Lion food web considers the main exploited fish species such as sardine, named European pilchard, anchovy, mackerel, and hake. I hope these informations will help you for a better understanding of the following parts of the ECOMED Erasmus program. Bye-bye!
Marine zonation is essentially based on the distribution of plant species, hence the availability of light in the marine environment. The supralittoral zone corresponds to the area just concerned by the humectation by seawater spray. The mediolittoral zone is the tidal and waves influenced area. Just below, you have the infralittoral zone, always under the surface and limited in depth by the presence of the Posidonia oceanica meadows. In this area, you will find also the marine algal forest. The circalittoral zone is characterized by dim condition of light, and its lower limit is the lower limit of the development of the seaweeds, sometimes up to 120 meters depth. Part of the time, the mediolittoral zone is outside the seawater, depending on the tidal range and the wave exposure. The emblematic species is the calcareous algae Lithophyllum bisoides, protected species in France, that build Lithophyllum rims. This zone is very sensitive from the pollution at the surface. Posidonia oceanica may be the most popular ecosystem in the Mediterranean Sea. Posidonia oceanica develop large meadows from the surface up to 25 to 40 meter depth, depending on the water temperature. The total surface of Posidonia oceanica meadows in Mediterranean is around 35,000 square kilometers. It is present everywhere in the littoral except close to the mouth of the great rivers as the Rhône and the Nile rivers. This plant is endemic in the Mediterranean Sea. Very sensitive from a lot of perturbation and anthropic pressures. It is a protected species in France since 1987 because of its sensitivity, its ecological roles, and its constant regression all over the Mediterranean Sea. The Posidonia oceanica meadows have many ecosystem and ecological services. High primary production, secondary production with a large biomass of fishes, crustaceans, and echinoderms. It is also a nursery for many species. It is an habitat for many species for shelter and feeding activity. Also spawning ground. It allows sediment stabilization and also preserves the coast from erosion, particularly the beaches.
In temperate and cold oceans, the rocky coastal habitats are dominated by marine algal forests. They are considered as a key component of the coastal habitat. They are made by large brown algae, which are considered as ecosystem engineers because they are structuring the habitat in 3 dimensions. They are hosting a large diversity and they are acting as a fish nurseries. In the Mediterranean Sea, these marine forests are made by Cystothera species, which are around 40 taxa, and the Sargassum species, which are long-living species. They are species with a strong ecological demand, which means that their distribution are in belts depending on the depth, hydrodynamism, and light. They have a limited dispersal, few meters, because of heavy gametes, which are not floating, and they are very appreciated by herbivores. In pristine environment, they are forming very large meadows, like in this picture taken in Corsica, which can see a large forest of Cystothera brachycarpa at 15 meters depth. And they are doing also a large forest in the deep habitat, like this photo taken in Marseille for Cystothera zosterides at 40 meters depth.
The coralligenous outcrops are a Mediterranean sciaphilic habitat whose 3-dimensionally layered communities developed on a basal biogenic concretion of calcareous red algae growing in dim light condition, along with a rich assemblage of sciaphilic sessile animals. It grows from 20 meters down to 120 meters, depending on the light according to the exposition and the clarity of the seawater. Coralligenous outcrops are developed on basal biogenic concretion of calcareous red algae and that are ecosystem engineers. The coralligenous is well known for its richness in sciaphilic sessile animals, such as gorgonian sponges, bryozoans. Some species are emblematic, such as gorgonian red coral or some sponges. A large number of filter and suspension feeders dwell in the coralligenous outcrops. Coralligenous provides several ecosystem and ecological services, for example, through the provision of food, with large halieutic resources for artisanal fishing activity, providing nursery function, shelter, and pantry for many species. In addition to the fishing interest, the coralligenous is the place of development of several species of economic interest, such as the red coral, Corallium rubrum. This habitat is also the most attractive for divers in Mediterranean, so the diving activity can be carried by the presence of beautiful sites.